Hey everyone, and welcome back to Abyssin. Today, we're diving into a story that's both fascinating and tragic. In the early hours of April 24th, 1930, a deadly gas started seeping through the limestone tunnels of Howe Caverns, turning what should have been a regular morning into a nightmare, one that laid bare the deadly price of industrial negligence. It was 1930, and the U.S. was still reeling from the first waves of the Great Depression. Businesses were struggling to stay afloat, and the North American Cement Company was no different. Under pressure to cut costs and boost production, safety often took a back seat, creating the perfect environment for the small mistakes to turn into major disasters. The quiet hills of upstate New York were shaken awake as workers at the company's quarry prepared for the biggest blast of the season. This was a well-planned detonation set to use between 15,000 and 25,000 pounds of dynamite to dislodge around 66,000 tons of limestone from the hillside. Right at 5 a.m., the ground shook violently. The explosion was so powerful it could be heard for miles. The shock waves rippled through the bedrock, opening up thin, web-like cracks, some of which reached the intricate underground network of Howe Caverns below. The quarry workers, pleased with the blast's success, had no idea they had just unleashed something far more dangerous than falling rocks. That same day, 27-year-old Owen Wallace, the head electrician responsible for the cave's lighting system, showed up for another day on the job, completely unaware that he was stepping into a death trap. Despite the cavern's complex layout and natural hazards, the company hadn't installed forced ventilation systems or any sort of air quality monitoring. Entry into the cave relied on little more than blind trust that nothing would go wrong. There were no emergency protocols in place, no gas masks, no safety training. To them, safety was just another cost to cut. By his side was 45-year-old John Sagendorf, the company's secretary. But John was more than just an office guy. He often tagged along with the technical crews deep into the caverns to make sure everything was running as safely as possible. Wallace and Sagendorf stepped into the elevator that would lower them into what they believed was a safe and familiar space. But the air they were breathing was already being tainted by the blast that had rocked the quarry that morning. Hidden inside the fractured rock, toxic gases began moving through newly opened fissures, snaking along the natural curves of the limestone and heading straight into the heart of the caves. Gases like carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide, trapped underground for thousands of years, were now freely flowing through the same tunnels that had enchanted visitors just hours earlier. As the elevator descended down the natural shaft connecting the surface to the lower chambers, those gases were already drifting through the stone corridors, carried by natural air currents and pressure patterns that laid them directly to the work site, the area around the Moscow Bell. One of the cave's most iconic formations was where they began their routine maintenance work. As Wallace adjusted the lighting connections and Sagendorf checked the safety rails and pathways, neither man noticed the subtle shift in the air. The poison was creeping in slowly, settling into the lowest parts of the cave, unnoticed until it was too late. At first, the symptoms were easy to dismiss, maybe a little shortness of breath, maybe a bit of dizziness blamed on the dim lights. But the gases were relentless. They bound to the red blood cells, stopping oxygen from reaching the body, even as the person continued to breathe. When the toxic concentration hit deadly levels, everything changed. What started as just another workday became a fight for survival. Blurred vision, disorientation, and sudden weakness turned the familiar underground into a trap. Wallace and Sagendorf collapsed, unaware of what had hit them, victims of a disaster that had started with a single quarry blast. Back on the surface, a 25-year-old tour guide started to notice something was off. The two men had been gone far too long for what should have been a quick check. Growing concerned, he decided to head down into the cave to look for them. What he didn't realize was that he was about to step into the same toxic environment that had already claimed 2 lives. He followed the route he knew Wallace and Sagendorf had taken, walking deeper into tunnels now saturated with deadly gases. Everything looked normal, but the air was full of poison. When he reached the Moscow Bell and saw the two men lying motionless, the shock hit him like a brick. But before he could fully process what had happened, the gas was already starting to take hold. The symptoms came fast: dizziness, shortness of breath, muscle weakness. The rescue mission turned into a desperate sprint for his own survival. Realizing there was no hope of helping the others, he focused everything on getting back to the elevator, his only escape. With his body failing and consciousness slipping, he pushed forward. Every step was a battle against the invisible killer. Making it back through that suffocating maze took an almost inhuman level of strength. When he finally reached the surface, he collapsed. His semi-conscious state made it clear. Something was very, very wrong underground. Rescuers acted quickly. He was rushed to a hospital in Albany, where doctors fought to reverse the effects of the gas exposure. Once the danger was confirmed, emergency crews geared up with oxygen tanks and rudimentary containment tools and managed to retrieve Wallace and Sagendorf's bodies later that morning. As word of the tragedy spread across Bromanville, a woman named Elizabeth Louise Millspaugh found herself at the center of the chaos. Working as a switchboard operator, she became the main point of contact in the unfolding emergency. Calls from cave management, first responders, frantic family members, and curious reporters turned her station into a hub of crisis communication. Medical reports later confirmed what many already feared. Wallace and Sagendorf had died of asphyxiation, poisoned by gases released by the explosion. The connection between the quarry blast and their deaths was undeniable. In mourning, Martha Wallace and Mabel Sagendorf, the victims' widows, came together. Convinced that the company's negligence had cost their husbands their lives, they took on the North American Cement Company in court. The lawsuit became a David versus Goliath battle that caught public attention and sparked nationwide debates about workplace safety and corporate accountability. But history doesn't give us a clear answer on how it ended. It's unknown whether the widows received any compensation or if the company was ever held accountable. The incident soon caught the attention of state officials and workplace safety organizations. Even though investigations moved slowly by today's standards, the Howe Caverns disaster became a prime example of corporate failure. Years later, it would be referenced in meetings and reports on underground safety, pushing forward real changes in safety laws and procedures. It's hard to hear the story and not feel a knot in your chest. What happened in Howe Caverns wasn't just an accident, it was the result of careless decisions in a system that put profits ahead of lives. Owen Wallace and John Sagendorf were just doing their jobs, trusting that they were in a safe environment. And yet they died, suffocated by a danger no one had bothered to prepare for. What hits hardest is knowing this all could have been avoided with precautions that are now considered standard. And the thought of the guide fighting to survive as he tried to save them, that's what really stays with you. This can't just be another forgotten tragedy. It's a reminder that safety is never optional and that negligence always comes with a cost, sometimes paid with human lives. Let's hope this never happens again, and that we keep these victims' memories alive by learning from what went wrong. If you found this story interesting, wait till you see the one popping up on your screen right now. It started off like a simple adventure, just like this one, but ended in an even darker twist. Hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. It really helps out. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.